Many people have slapped on Stussy, thinking of her as an irrelevant minor character, but what if I told you she's actually far more important to the story than anyone ever thought, being an undercover triple agent working for the Revolutionary Army, a former member of the Rocks Pirates, and the user of the mythological devil fruit Bad Fruit, model Succubus. And beyond that, what if I told you that there are other clones of former Rocks Pirates, including Jewelry Bonnie potentially being the clone of Big Mom that Kuma adopted? Welcome to Chapter Secrets, where we break down all the details in every One Piece chapter. Let's begin. Now, we find ourselves in a really peculiar situation in Egghead, as on one side we have a traitor amongst our midst of those found at the lava face who disabled the shield of the Frontier Dome, but on the other hand there also seems to be a traitor among the enemies, as Vegapunk claims to have another ally on the island. Now, for the traitor on our side, given how it can be either the Straw Hats or Bonnie, it would have to be one of the Vegapunks, and while there's several possible options, the simplest answer could actually be Caribou. Caribou is desperately trying to escape ever since Zoro dumped him off the island, so it makes sense he would have tried to disable the Frontier Dome to try and desperately escape. It's possible that rather than disable it manually through the control center, he might have tried to just jam the machine with his fruit or something, causing the systems to briefly go down. However, on the opposite end is what interests us a lot more, being the ally on the other side. So basically, in order to escape Egghead, Vegapunk Pythagoras mentioned how technically they now have an ally on Egghead who could assist with their getaway. Edison, however, brought this into question, claiming that their ally would lose their cover with the government and cause them to be persecuted by them, but Stella simply gave up and called the ally to ask for help. But who is this ally? Well, as absurd as it sounded at first, I think it's actually Stussy, and the newest chapter seems to support this claim. Now, I've been saying this online ever since chapter 1071 was out, but once you start thinking about it, Stussy makes a lot of sense to be this mysterious ally. For starters, there's really not that many other characters who are on this island who could serve as allies, as not counting the Straw Hats, Bonnie, and the Punks, we only have Sentomaru, who is kinda busy taking a nap on the ground, Caribou, and CP0. And considering that Lucci and Kaku are most certainly not the ally, that makes Stussy the perfect candidate. There's also an important detail that easily gets lost in translation, being that in Japanese, the ally speaks in a very polite language, something that wouldn't fit many other characters who speak more crassly, sorry Coppercaban and Soul fans, but would perfectly align with someone more refined like Stussy. Beyond that though, it's Stussy's deep connection with Vegapunk that makes this allegiance all the more evident. You see, it's become evident that Stussy has some familiarity with Vegapunk, as she mentioned how Egghead was nostalgic to her, meaning she was there long ago, and she seemed to be familiar with a lot of the island's technology and systems, showing a great deal of technical scientific knowledge. This connection runs deeper in the fact that she was very well acquainted with Dufeld, the founder of Mads back in the day, as revealed in the cover story. The two of them seemed fairly acquainted with each other, but specifically when Stussy commented on how pudding reminds her of a younger self, Dufeld commented that being decades ago. This not only indicates that Stussy is a lot older than she appears to be, with even her Vivercard databook entry listing her age simply as secret, but also that Dufeld knew her decades ago. Considering that the Mads were active during a time from around 25 to 35-ish years ago, it would make sense if they knew each other from back then, particularly since the latest cover story showed the original 5 members of Mads, including a woman with short blonde hair and stockings just like Stussy, and if she was Vegapunk's ally today, then it makes sense Oda is keeping her identity covered in this cover page to not give away too many clues. And furthermore, her suspicion makes a lot of sense, because if you remove the T from Stussy's name, her name becomes Sussy. Okay, maybe not that last one. But yeah, if Stussy was a member of Mads that later, when serving to the government, decided to become a CP0 agent, it would just make so much sense if she actually maintained her allegiance to Vegapunk and infiltrated as a Cypher Police agent. In fact, it's possible that given how Vegapunk is secretly working for Dragon and the Revolutionary Army, that similarly Stussy is also acting as a sleeper agent for the Revolutionary Army. This would be a very fitting plot twist, because Stussy was introduced as an underworld emperor, being known as the Queen of the Pleasure District, but was revealed to actually be a double agent working as a CP0 member, something I also predicted back in the day actually, so it'd be very fitting if all along she was actually a triple agent working for the Revolutionaries, bringing her story all around. This would explain why she kept allowing Kaku to fall into the traps, as well as why she also pressured Lucci to wait on orders from the Marines before going after Vegapunk. This might even explain why she was the one who tipped Morgans about Luffy being the mastermind of the whole Cake Island incident, since he is Dragon's son after all. She's been undercover for a long time, feeding info from within the government's most secret services to Vegapunk and Dragon, which is why Edison suggested to not blow her cover that easily, but now she's switching sides back again when Stella requested her help to escape. And through the newest chapter, we can also get an idea of what Stussy's connection to Mads is, being in reality a clone of Miss Buckingham Stussy. Miss Buckingham Stussy, now more commonly known as Miss Buckin, is the mother of former Shichibukai Edward Weevil and self-proclaimed lover of Whitebeard, claiming Weevil to be their child. It's of course brought into question on if the two actually had Weevil together, given how she seems to be taking advantage of her kid, but I wouldn't be surprised if Weevil could actually be the legitimate son of Whitebeard, just not Buckin's own child. But beyond that, she's also a former member of the Rocks, as Marco confirmed in chapter 909 that around 40 years ago, Miss Buckin was on the same crew as Whitebeard, which would have been the Rocks back then, which indicates that at least in her prime, she was likely very powerful to be on that crew. This would explain why she was able to defeat and awaken Kaku so easily, which, by the way, would be a really cute detail since in the chapter when Stussy first debuted, she had a drink from a screaming giraffe. This isn't all, however, as to top all of this off, Stussy can be seen with bat-like wings, which makes me believe that she actually has eaten a mythological type zoan, the Bato-Bato-no-Mi or Bad fruit model succubus. I don't think that she's eaten a vampire fruit, since that's already been eaten by a non-canon character, being Patrick Radfield from One Piece Unlimited World Red, and Oda usually likes to name canon and non-canon fruits that have the same ability with different names for the sake of continuity. Even if they're non-canon, Oda likes to make a distinction, so in this case, even beyond all that, I think that succubus is also just a much more fitting fruit for Stussy. The succubus is a demon of folklore who is usually depicted in its modern form as a seductive woman with bat-like wings that seduces men to devour their blood. This blood allows the succubus to always remain with a young appearance, which allows her to keep seducing men even after many years. This may actually be the secret behind Stussy's own incredible youthful age. After all, Dufeld already suggests that she's lived for several decades, which she must have if she is a member of Mads, but if she is a clone of Buckin, then she would have to be around 76 years old like she is right now. But the reason she manages to look this young is because of her succubus fruit, which being a mythological fruit, it would have special properties, in this case granting Stussy perennial youth, though not immortality, as she likely can still die, just not of old age, as well as allowing her to suck blood out of her enemies, causing them to faint. This would also likely explain the name Buckingham, as it's likely reference to Buckingham Palace, the seat of British royalty, with Stussy potentially even referencing Queen Elizabeth II and how she was famously known to have lived a very long time, having had one of the longest rules of a queen in history, and often joked of being perennially youthful or downright immortal. However, if that's the case, then it would suggest that Miss Buckin does not have the fruit, and that it wasn't inherited with the clone and its bloodline elements, as otherwise Miss Buckin would also look fairly young now, unless the young age is caused by something else instead, meaning that the Stussy clone was likely fed the fruit after she was born. Much like Stussy, we've seen in several instances now that living beings can be cloned, what with the Kuma clones, the Germa army, the Seraphim, or someone like Stussy being the first in this long line. The fact that she's referred to as the #1 clone that Mads created makes me wonder if more existed out there among all the characters we know, particularly other clones of the Rocks pirates. A likely chance could be Edward Weevil, who maybe is a partially filled clone of Whitebeard rather than his kid, who maybe Miss Bucking managed to get in exchange for providing her own clone to Mads. But on the other hand, there's a certain character who comes to mind, someone who is an Egghead right now and very relevant to the current plot: Jewelry Bonnie. You see, if you've been in the fandom long enough, you may recall that the fandom has had a big obsession with the theory that Bonnie is actually Big Mom's daughter for a very long time. This is because the two look quite alike, have the same hair color, and even similar traits such as their obsession with food. However, this theory has lost a lot of popularity once it was revealed that Big Mom has like a gajillion children, which wouldn't really make Bonnie being a Yonko's kid quite that important anymore. But what if we had it wrong this whole time and Bonnie wasn't the kid of Big Mom, but her clone? After all, the two behave in very similar ways, both wanting to eat all the time and both being easily prone to getting angry and being overly emotional. The two also practically look identical. We don't have a 21-year-old Big Mom to use for reference, but she hardly looks much different from a 28-year-old Big Mom. Unfortunately, the only caveat in this theory is that Bonnie actually has purple eyes, and since Big Mom has orange-brown eyes, then the two can't possibly be clones of each other. Or does she? Because actually this was an anime-only change, and in the original manga designs by Oda, Bonnie actually has the exact same eye color as Lin Lin, making her look practically biologically identical to Big Mom. You might bring into question how older Bonnie looked fairly different from Big Mom, but as this chapter clarified, Bonnie's power allows someone to age into different potential futures of their older selves, which is why Luffy ages his future where things went wrong, for example, or Bonnie aged herself into a future where she is really buff. Plus, her fruit might also explain why she always looks so slim despite always eating so much, which would make her slimmer than Big Mom looked. And you have to keep in mind that although Bonnie looks around the age of 22, Oda clarified in the SBS that's only the appearance she is usually seen in, and that her real age might be very different. So much like Stussy, she is likely older than that, and may have been similarly been born as a clone of Big Mom shortly after the God Valley incident during the period of Mads, which would explain why Akainu considered Bonnie such a threat, which wouldn't make quite as much sense if she's just Kuma's daughter. The girl that Vegapunk speaks of at the start of the chapter could potentially maybe not even just be referring to Stussy, but maybe Bonnie as well. After her birth as a clone, Kuma may have grown attached to her and decided to take her in and raise her as his own daughter, which is why she considers herself as such. This would explain the discrepancy that Kuma is said to be from a special race, but Bonnie instead seems to be a full-blooded human, which by the way likely has to do with the fact that this chapter confirmed Kuma does actually have real bear-like ears. And that could also explain why Vegapunk promised to Kuma that he would never divulge the secrets of his past to Bonnie. As we find out in this chapter, Vegapunk brought up how a certain doctor in the West Blue believed that people's souls are lost after death, which, given his age, location, and research into the dead, this certain doctor may very well be Dr. Hogback. But yeah, as many suspected, Kuma's consciousness, what some would call the soul, has been preserved thanks to the use of his powers, meaning that despite Kuma being just an empty dead robot right now, he could potentially come back if those memories are re-implanted into him. And as we see in this chapter too, Vegapunk tried to stop Bonnie from accessing her father's memories at all costs, because he promised Kuma that he would not let her know the truth of Kuma's past. And it would make a lot of sense if that truth is that Bonnie was a lab experiment, a clone of Big Mom, because Kuma wanted to spare Bonnie from the truth of having an existential crisis of just being a clone of someone else. Still, this is just a potential theory, as at the same time there's some aspects that still need more clarification, but there's also the chance that Kuma also hides some dark truths behind his past, and that there may have been very real reasons as to why he was called the Tyrant back in his youth that Bonnie may struggle to accept, seeing as how she claimed that there is no way her father could have committed any crimes. This would also explain why Kuma did not want to show his memories to even Vegapunk, who wouldn't really be surprised if Bonnie really is a clone. But furthermore, this makes me wonder if it really is just the same process behind how Kaida's fruit was also cloned, especially as Vegapunk describes Stussy's birth as being born upon this world, similarly wording to how all things that are dreamed of are born upon this world, which refer to devil fruits, as after all Zoan fruits are said to possess a will of their own, meaning that by all means they are actually living creatures. This might be why they are able to be cloned that easily, whereas Paramecia required copying and replicating the mechanics of each fruit's respective bloodline elements effect through the green blood, and Logia are straight up too hard to clone. But since Zoan fruits are actually alive, then that's the reason why they too can be cloned a lot more easily. Not only do they carry the wills of living animals within them, but some, like the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, even carry the will of a god within. But I'm sure we'll find out more secrets about the truth of devil fruits soon enough.